The night shift at Windsor Castle had a particular kind of silence to it. Not peaceful, not restful, the kind of silence that sits on your chest. Thomas Hale had worked the East Corridor for 11 years. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every draft that came through the old stone walls, every camera angle that caught nothing but the backs of oil paintings and the occasional mouse. He knew this building the way you only know a place after you've spent thousands of nights alone inside it. Which is exactly why, when something was wrong, he knew. It started small, the way most things do. He was doing his 2 a.m. walkthrough. Routine, documented, filed. Camera check, door check, log entry. Same as always. He reached monitor 7, the one covering the private corridor outside the family's East Wing quarters, and pulled up the evening's recorded feed. Static. Not a full blackout. Not the kind of static that means a cable's come loose. Something more precise than that. A gap. Clean-edged. 47 minutes of footage, from 9:04 p.m. to 9:51 p.m., simply gone. Thomas stared at the screen for a long moment. His tea went cold. He rewound. Played it forward. Rewound again. The timestamp jumped. 9:03. Then 9:52. Like someone had just folded time in half and pressed it flat. He checked the adjacent cameras. The outer corridor. The garden-facing window feed. Both showed the same architectural nothing they always showed. But both were intact. Continuous. Unbroken. Only camera 7 had been touched. He logged it. That was protocol. You log anomalies. You report them up the chain. You don't speculate in writing. He wrote, gap detected in feed, monitor 7, East Wing corridor. Duration, 47 minutes. Technical fault suspected. Recommend review. He didn't write what he was actually thinking. What he was actually thinking was that 47 minutes is not a technical fault. Technical faults are messy. They stutter and freeze and pixelate. They don't arrive precisely at 9:04 and resolve themselves just as precisely at 9:51. That kind of cleanliness requires a person. It requires someone who knows the system well enough to reach into it quietly and take something out without leaving fingerprints. He sat back in his chair. The building breathed around him. Then, he remembered something. A small thing. The kind of thing your brain files away without telling you, and only surfaces when you're sitting in the dark at 2 in the morning staring at a timestamp that shouldn't exist. He'd seen Princess Charlotte earlier that evening. Not to speak to. He never spoke to the family directly unless spoken to first. That wasn't coldness. That was respect for the architecture of their world, the invisible lines everyone agreed to pretend weren't there. He'd seen her in the way you see weather. She'd passed through his peripheral vision at the far end of the corridor sometime around. He thought about it. Pressed his memory. Around 9. She'd been walking fast. Head down. The posture of someone who wanted to be somewhere else. Or somewhere nowhere at all. And there had been something in the set of her shoulders, the way she was holding her own elbows, that hadn't sat right with him at the time. He hadn't thought about it then. Now he couldn't stop. He pulled up the adjacent camera feed again. The outer corridor. And there, at 9:02, 2 minutes before the gap began, was a shape. Small. Moving fast. Just the edge of a figure turning the corner toward the East Wing. Then, monitor 7 went dark. Thomas closed his log. Opened it again. Looked at what he'd written. Technical fault suspected. He stared at those words for a long time. Then, he added 3 more, very quietly, as if someone might hear him type them. Or not suspected. He didn't sleep when his shift ended. He drove home through the gray November morning. The kind of morning that arrives with no announcement. Just pale light pressing through cloud cover like it gave up halfway. He made toast he didn't eat. He sat at his kitchen table with his hands around a mug and thought about what 47 minutes of silence actually meant. Because here's what nobody tells you about working close to power. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's years of quiet professionalism and quiet loyalty and learning to look at things you're not meant to understand. The job description is never written honestly. What it actually says, underneath all the formal language, is this: you will see things. You will not ask questions. You will protect the institution with your silence as much as with your presence. Thomas had always been good at that. He'd seen a lot of things in 11 years. But he'd never seen footage deleted. And he'd certainly never seen it deleted around one of the children. He thought about Charlotte. Not in a complicated way. He didn't know her, not really. You don't know people you watch from corridors. But he'd watched her grow up across those 11 years the way you watch a tree grow in a garden you tend without owning. You notice the changes without meaning to. The lanky face. The sudden confidence at around 14. The way she'd started carrying herself differently in the last year or so. Something more careful in it. Something that looked like she was deciding how much of herself to show, and to whom. She was 17. He had a daughter who was 19. That's probably where it came from, the thing that wouldn't let him sleep. The part of him that wasn't a guard, but a father, sitting at a kitchen table in the gray morning, thinking about a girl walking fast with her arms wrapped around herself. And 47 minutes of darkness that someone very deliberately put there. The call came 3 days later. Thomas wasn't expecting it. He'd made his report, the formal one, through the proper channels. He'd been professional and measured and given them absolutely nothing they could dismiss as paranoia. He'd simply reported the technical gap and noted the adjacent footage and left the obvious conclusion for someone else to reach. He'd expected it to disappear into the bureaucracy. Instead, Margaret Fellows called him. Margaret was the head of household operations, not security, not comms, not any of the offices that made sense for this kind of situation. She was the woman who managed the invisible machinery of daily palace life. Menus and schedules and the thousand small dignities that made a royal residence function. She was 60-something, spectacled, and had the kind of composure that comes from decades of knowing exactly where all the bodies were buried while making sure the flower arrangements were perfect. She asked him to come in on his day off. Not a request. Not exactly an order. The kind of phrasing that lives in the narrow strip between them. He came in. Her office was warm. There was tea already made. She did not pour him any. She sat across from him with her hands folded and her face arranged into something that might have been neutrality, but felt more like controlled concern, the way a doctor's face looks when they're about to say something careful. Your report, she said. Yes. You were thorough. I tried to be. She looked at him for a moment, measuring, not unkindly. Thomas, you've worked here a long time, 11 years. And, in that time, have you ever had cause to doubt the integrity of our internal systems? He understood what was being offered. A graceful exit. A way to revise his report into something more comfortable. I may have been mistaken. Likely a technical issue. Probably nothing. The language of institutional preservation. He'd heard it before, delivered to other people, and watched them take it because that's what you do when the architecture of your livelihood depends on it. He thought about his daughter. Then, he thought about Charlotte. No, he said. I haven't. Margaret's hands unfolded. She set them flat on the desk. Looked down at them for a moment. The footage gap is confirmed, she said. You weren't mistaken. He waited. What you don't know, she said, and her voice went very quiet then, the quietness of a room where something real is about to be said, is that it wasn't the only one. She slid a photograph across the desk. He looked at it. It was a screenshot. Adjacent camera, the garden-facing feed that had come through intact and continuous. Timestamped 9:48, 3 minutes before Monitor 7 came back online. The image was low resolution and taken from an odd angle. The way security footage always makes the world look slightly alien. Everyone a little flattened, a little ghost-like. But it was clear enough. Charlotte was sitting on the floor. In the corridor. Actually on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. And her face. Even in the low resolution, even at that angle, her face was unmistakable. She'd been crying. Not politely. Not the kind of crying that's almost decorative, the kind people do in films where a single tear traces an elegant line. The real kind. The kind that makes your whole face fight itself. Thomas stared at the photograph for a long time. Who took the footage from Monitor 7? He said. Margaret didn't answer immediately. He looked up. Her expression had changed in the small way that people's expressions change when they've already paid a price for knowing something. That, she said, is the question, isn't it? Margaret, I don't know, she said. And the strange thing was, he believed her. Not because she was trustworthy, necessarily. He didn't know enough about her to say that. But because she looked tired in the particular way people look tired when they're telling the truth about something they wish they didn't know. I have theories. There are people in certain offices who would have both the access and she stopped. Recalibrated. The motivation. For what? To hide a 17-year-old girl crying in a corridor. To control the narrative around it. Yes. She said it plainly. You know how this works. He did. He knew exactly how it worked. Image management wasn't a side operation, it was infrastructure. Whole teams of people dedicated to the architecture of public perception, to the careful curation of what was seen and what wasn't, to making sure that everything the institution showed the world was the version of itself it had chosen to show. It was professional. It was sophisticated. In certain lights, you could almost call it caring. In other lights, it looked like erasing a crying child. Does she know? He said. Margaret picked the photograph back up. I don't know what she knows. Does anyone, he stopped. Started again. Is anyone with her? Is anyone actually talking to her? The silence that followed that question was the loudest thing he'd heard in 11 years. He saw her 4 days later. Not planned. Not orchestrated. Just the ordinary randomness of a large building, and a Thursday afternoon, and 2 people who happened to turn the same corner at the same time. Charlotte was alone, which surprised him. She was usually moving with at least one aide hovering at a respectful distance, the invisible support structure always orbiting. But she was alone, walking with her head down, wearing a jumper that was too big for her, the sleeves pulled over her hands. And she almost walked straight into him. She stopped. He stepped back. I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness. My fault entirely. She looked up. Her eyes moved over his face in the way young people's eyes do when they're trying to figure out where you fit in the map of their world, threat, ally, furniture. You're Thomas, she said. He was surprised she knew his name. He tried not to show it. Yes, ma'am. East Wing. She said it like she was just locating him in her mental geography. That's right. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face was doing the work of deciding something. He recognized that look too. He saw it in his daughter sometimes, right before she said something real. You filed a report, she said. He went still. I'm not angry, she said quickly, and the quickness of it, the way she rushed to reassure him, made something ache a little in his chest. I know you did. Someone told me. A pause. She looked down at her sleeves, pulled one further over her hand. I just wanted you to know that I know you saw it. And I know what you saw. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the most important thing is to not say anything. I'm fine, she said. The 2 most exhausted words in the English language. He looked at her. 17 years old, standing in a corridor with her sleeves over her hands, telling a night guard she was fine. I'm glad, he said. Not because he believed her. Because it was what she needed to hear, and because it gave her the exit, the clean one, if she wanted it. She didn't take it. She stood there another moment, looked up at the ceiling, that old stone ceiling, that weight of centuries pressing gently down, and then back at him. Do you know what the worst part is? She said. He waited. It's not the crying. Her voice was very steady. That was the most startling thing. It was the voice of someone who had already processed enough to be able to talk about it without breaking, which meant she'd been carrying it alone for a while. Everyone cries. I know that. I'm not embarrassed about that. She paused. The worst part is knowing that someone decided it was a problem. That someone looked at me, sitting there, and thought, that needs to disappear. The corridor was quiet. Like the whole point, she said, was to make sure no one would ever know I had a bad night. Not to help me have fewer of them. Just to make sure it stayed invisible. Thomas thought about 11 years of quiet professionalism. About institutional loyalty. About the report he'd filed, and the photograph on Margaret's desk, and the 3 words he'd added to his log in the dark at 2 in the morning. He thought about his daughter. I know you can't say anything, Charlotte said. She wasn't being bitter about it. Just acknowledging reality the way people do when they've grown up inside the machinery of it. I know that's how it works. It is, he said. That's how it works. Another pause. The building breathed. But you still filed the report, she said. He met her eyes. I still filed the report. Something shifted in her face then, barely visible. The kind of shift that isn't relief, exactly, and isn't gratitude, exactly, but is something that lives between them. The specific feeling of discovering that someone in a building full of people performing loyalty had done something small and real instead. She nodded, pulled her sleeves down further. Thank you, she said. And she walked away down the corridor and turned the corner and was gone. And the silence of Windsor Castle settled back in around Thomas like water filling a space. He stood there for a moment. Then he did his rounds. He checked every camera. He logged every entry. He walked every corridor with the particular thoroughness of someone who has decided, at some point between 2 in the morning and a Thursday afternoon, that bearing witness is also a form of protection. That documentation is not bureaucracy. That's sometimes the most important thing a person can do in a building full of managed silence is to refuse to be managed. The East Wing corridor was empty. Monitor 7 was running clean. He noted it in the log. Timestamp accurate. Feed continuous. Nothing unusual to report. He meant it differently this time. 3 weeks later, Thomas received a quiet transfer offer. Different wing, different shift. Better hours, nominally. The kind of lateral move that isn't a punishment, but isn't nothing, either. He understood what it was. He accepted it without comment. He packed the small things from his station, a photograph of his daughter, a chipped mug, a logbook nearly full, And he walked out of the east corridor for the last time on a Tuesday evening when the light was going flat and gray and the building was holding its 1,000-year silence around him. At the end of the corridor, right before he turned the corner, he looked back at monitor 7. The camera faced him steadily. Red light blinking. Continuous. He nodded at it. A small, private thing. Then he walked out. The footage of that moment stayed intact. Nobody deleted it.